Greetings, my fellow knights, and welcome back to Recon by Fire, and today we will be reviewing the Imperial Knights Codex. So without further ado, let's dive on in. First up is the army rule, where at the beginning of the battle, you will select a deed to accomplish and a quality to help you accomplish that deed. If you select them randomly by rolling a d6 and comparing it to a chart in the Codex, you will generate 3 command points upon accomplishing your deed. If you just straight up pick them manually, then you will only generate 2 CP. That being said, you will become honored immediately upon completion, which is a nice quality of life upgrade versus having to wait to your subsequent command phase. That being said, these will not count towards your CP generation for the turn, so you can still generate an additional one by discarding a secondary at the end of your turn. As for the deeds, we now have 3 to choose from instead of the 2 from the index. First off is the improvement from the index, where now we get to pick any character model from the opponent's army, and if we are able to successfully destroy it, we've completed the deed. This is a nice little quality of life upgrade because everyone has fought those kind of armies where the warlord is simply some small lone op or CP generating character that sits in the backfield and we never see them. And we only had the chance of taking them out when it was something like Angron or Calgar, where they were incentivized to push them forward. Now, you're able to select any character in the opponent's army to include things like their melee characters that want to get in the fight, or maybe something that's going to come down in Deep Strike attached to a Terminator squad, which is nice. I don't know if this is always going to be the one that you pick because of the second one. This one simply states that you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of their turn. So the opponent does have a full turn to try to take over more than you do, which doesn't necessarily mean blasting your units off objective, but simply out-OCing you. That being said, if you do manage a way where maybe you take over your home and your expansion and they don't have a solid way of taking over the center, or the expansion for whatever reason, you jail them up or something like that, then you can score it that way. But I can easily see this being one because it's kind of what you want to be doing anyways, and there could easily be round 2 or 3 where you end up sneaking out the 3 objectives to their 2 and they simply can't blast you off of the 3rd. Finally, the last one is to destroy more enemy units than the current battle round. For example, if it's round 2, you'd have to destroy 3 enemy units to complete this deed. It is possible, though I do think this one is potentially the most difficult out of the 3 to accomplish, only because of the fact that the longer the game goes, the more difficult it will become because A, the more units you have to destroy to meet that quota, and B, chances are you're going to have less models to be able to accomplish that deed. So this is probably the one I will be selecting the least, but overall, I really like the fact that we have multiple choices now. We now also have 3 qualities that we are able to choose from. The first one is the familiar one, where we can re-roll a hit roll and a wound roll per activation, which seems to be the most popular one, and truth be told, the one that I'm pretty much almost always going to be taking. Second one is also something you might be familiar with. All our units will get +2 movement and +1 to their advance and charge rolls, which is really nice. That's a fantastic movement buff, and I could definitely see this being useful based on specific matchups. And finally, the last one, models will get +2 objective control and +1 leadership for the rest of the game. This one is a good buff and can come in handy, but compared to the other 2, it falls short, and I'm really never going to be taking this one. Overall, I think this is a fantastic quality of life and improvement for us Knight players. I am going to 100% be selecting mine, to be completely honest. I could see value and just excitement to select them at random. Maybe you're playing a fluffier game or with friends or whatnot. But for me, I'm pretty much either going to be taking, most likely my default will be to control more objectives than my opponent. But based on their army configuration, there may be a chance that I take destroy a character. And then I'm always going to pick reroll hits and wounds because movement does win games. And I'm a big fan of that. But man, those rerolls really increase our consistency. And I personally like to take the dice out as much as possible. And just having that little bit more consistency when it matters really makes a difference. I've seen this difference as I started to play Chaos Knights as well. And just the specific models that don't really feel like they have the same punch or effectiveness because they lack just that simple reroll is absolutely huge, especially if you're running a list that has more activations where now you're stacking more and more rerolls. I could see if maybe you're running 4 or 5 bigs and you have less activations where now you're probably more incentivized to take over the extra movement to make sure your big guys can get where they're going. But if you're kind of going in the middle of the road or leaning more towards more armigers and allies to have more activations, I do think, well, I guess allies don't get it, but the rerolls are really what comes through. And that's pretty much my opinion and what I'm going to be doing with it. Moving on to detachments. First up, we have the Valourstrike Lance, and the detachment rule is anytime an Imperial Knight model makes an advance, it's able to re-roll the advance roll, and their ranged weapons will gain the assault keyword. This rule is absolutely fantastic. We've seen it or something similar to it in other books, and it's always been very powerful. Movement wins games, as I mentioned earlier, and this really benefits army-wide, which is always a nice detachment rule. More so the gun platforms that are only shooting, but still even the ones that are split halfway can gain some benefit from this. Overall, solid detachment rule. Just a disclaimer before we go into the enhancements, I am the type of player that I prefer to take extra models versus beefing up the models I already have, unless the enhancement is a banger or crucial to the strategy I have for this detachment. That being said, all the enhancements in this detachment have a theme where the bear can use the enhancement to buff another unit that is within 12 inches and visible to it. So these real enhancements go on one unit, but really buff another. First up is Bearer of the Iron Chalice, that again has that disclaimer we just mentioned. That selected model regains up to D3 lost wounds or up to 3 lost wounds in your army if it's honored. Not bad. It's fine. I consider this very filler, to be completely honest with you. If I have the points, I'll throw it in, but I'm not going to make big plays to try to fit it. I think a free heal is always nice, and this will make up somewhat of a difference from a feel no pain. But that being said, most of the time when people are going to take down our knights, they're going to focus them down, and rarely do they survive unless they're in the outskirts. Next up is Bearer of the Evanescent Ion. Again, this one triggers at the end of the movement phase, another knight model within 12 inches, and they gain stealth until the beginning of your next movement phase. Yeah, this one's solid. Again, nothing bad, nothing good about it. It works. Getting -1 to hit on most things is pretty solid for keeping one of your big knights alive when you know they're going to be focused fired. Third enhancement is Judicant's Helm, which triggers at the beginning of the shooting phase and only lasts until the end of the phase, but you can give ranged weapons for another model, ignores cover. Works fantastic on a Crusader and works pretty well on a Halvarin as well. Final enhancement is Bearer of the Lancer's Sigil, and this allows a knight to buff another model within 12 at the beginning of the charge phase, allowing that model to reroll charges. Again, solid. None of these are absolute game breakers or over the moon for, but they're all solid. I think they're great fillers. You are not going to complain if you can bring them, but you're also not going to miss out if you don't have the points for them either. So I think they're fine. Overall, I do think the enhancements can be a little awkward at times because of the fact that the model that's carrying it isn't the one that's going to receive the buff, but 12 inches does give you a decent amount of leeway. So I think as long as you kind of plan accordingly, i.e. getting your ranged buffs on Crusaders or your more ranged platforms, so they're going to stay at range, and the more melee focused ones like reroll charges on maybe a Lancer that's going to roll out with 2 Warglaives or a Gallant assisting it, I think it's going to work out. Moving on to the stratagems, this is where the detachment gets even spicier, as some of these stratagems allow you to target up to 3 different knights with them as long as they are all within 9 inches horizontally of a single point. This doesn't have to be an objective or anything in particular, it's just a center point within that 3-inch range. If all 3 of them are touching it, then you can buff all 3 of them. So slight twist to something similar to Squire's Duty, but it also just says Imperial Knights model. So you can actually target both Armigers, Questoris, Cerastus, and Dominus Knights at the same time. This is a fantastic buff. So let's dive on in. First up is Run Them Through, which for 1 CP in your fight phase, you can give up to 3 knights their melee weapons Lance, which is essentially a +1 to wound. That can be pretty powerful. Taking a lot of weapons from 3 to 2 to wound is huge. I think you have to have a pretty aggressive build and have quite the go turn to have to buff 3 different knights. But I mean, even buffing 2, I think you're getting your money's worth for sure, especially if you're doing the sweep on big knights. Oh man. Thunderstomp is an interesting one. It was modified from the index. For 1 CP in the fight phase, you can target a single knight model that has the stompy feet melee profile, so not the fist or the chainsword, and you can essentially double its attacks and give it an additional pip of AP. This can be very situational, but if it's one of those things where you need to take out a unit or two or a model or two to control the point or to take down the final kind of wounds off of a unit to score assassination or no prisoners, I think this could be useful. Are you going to use it very often? Probably not, but you're going to be glad that you have it when you need it. I think I still would have preferred the original one getting dev wounds because that's kind of what I use to take out characters or go through Terminators, but this one works too. Full Tilt is one that's been getting quite a bit of attention online, and for 2 CP in your movement phase, you can choose up to 3 knights, and until the end of the phase, add 2 to the movement characteristics of your models, and add 2 to the advance roll made for those models. So you can move ridiculously fast with this thing, and definitely catch some people off guard with their shooting lanes. I think this is a very powerful strat, and of course GW ID'd that, and that's why it costs 2. I like the fact that you can buff 3 different things, so it helps kind of reach out and touch someone from different angles instead of just barely getting one thing through. It also becomes even more powerful with the fact that towering, so we can toe into those objectives or buildings that our opponent thought that we might not be able to and get lines of fire that way. So I think that's really strong and like it. This one's great. 2 CP is pricey, so you're going to really want to try to make sure Canis is one of the knights you're targeting so he can offer that discount, and then this one gets really broken. But yeah, I think this one is fantastic, and you may have to remind your opponent about it every once in a while. I typically like sustain hits over lethals because the majority of the weapon systems that we bring are going to be wounding things on 3s, but having lethal hits in Helverians that are going to harder targets like other knights or tanks and things like that where we are potentially wounding on 5s, I think is really solid, especially when we have other knights that are going to be generating sustained hits already, i.e. the Crusader by standing still or Canis just inherently. I think that allows it to be very powerful. Also with the Defender, that might be something that can pop off as well if it's sitting in the back and you get the conversion, so it's critting on 4, 5s, and 6s. That can absolutely pop off as well. So I think this one's going to be one of the ones you're probably not going to use it as often as you did Squire's Duty, but I could be wrong. Maybe you do. I think Squire's Duty was a little more potent. Being able to change wounding on 5s to 4s or sometimes 4s to 3s was really strong. And of course, the extra AP was just huge. But overall, it's a fine strat. Tactical Foil is the one that has me most excited about this detachment. For 1 CP in your opponent's movement phase, after an enemy unit ends a normal, fallback, or advance move within 9 inches of one of your Imperial Knights, you can make a reactive move of up to D6 inches. This is awesome. I mean, how many times has a reactive move fooled our charges or our line of firing lanes or something like that? And now we're able to do it to them in turn. I think this is huge. This is great for things like if you had to charge an opponent and that got you kind of exposed a little too far, now you can reactive move to hide behind cover. Or if someone is getting a good charge on you on the other side of the wall so you can't shoot them, again, if they stop within 9, you can reactive move and make that charge even more difficult. So overall, I think this is a fantastic strat. It is a single knight because if not, that would be absolutely busted. But I think it's fantastic. Reactive moves are just always great. I love the Grey Knight one, and this one is just phenomenal as well. So I think this one you're going to be trying to do just about every turn. You can also use it to gain additional movement, right? If your opponent's trying to position a move block or get a firing lane on you, not necessarily trying to charge you, then, and you know everything that's in the immediate area isn't very looking to get into melee, you can also use that to reactive closer to your opponent and set up going through a wall that they weren't expecting it, or tagging another unit, especially if they're triggering this later in the movement phase and they don't have as many movements left. Oh, that's chef's kiss right there. You can also use the reactive move to position yourself outside of contagion to avoid the 6-inch deep strike from the Death Shroud, or to reactive move into a position where you are able to heroically intervene another target. Lastly, an oldie but a goodie, rotate ion shields. In your opponent's shooting phase for 1 CP, you can pick one knight to have a 4-up invul until the end of the phase. This one's interesting. As I've gotten more comfortable with it, I'm actually using it a little less. I think it's really based on the amount of shooting that is going to go into you. I definitely ask my opponent, hey, what all can see this target and how much AP are you throwing at it? And if it's only a handful of shots at AP 4 and 3, that's going to put me on my invul anyways, I kind of lean more towards just saving the CP for a reroll than the 4-up. Make a note of it when you guys play rotate ion shields, and kind of take note how many times you rolled 5s instead of 4s, or how many times you just didn't roll a 4 at all and didn't make a difference. And you'll kind of go back and forth and figure out, because your opponent also has to wound you and you have to make this preemptively. So I think it's a solid one. Obviously, if you know it's your go turn and you have one out in the middle and your opponent's going to try to focus fire on it, then by all means you rotate. And again, if you have Canis on the field and he's the one that's exposed and they're going to target, you can rotate for free, which is absolutely fantastic. So a solid addition. And yeah, I really like this suite of stratagems. If I'm being completely transparent, I think the one that might be the weakest in my eyes is Thunderstomp. And it's not necessarily weak, it's just situational, where you're going to be using, you can potentially use tactical foil and rotate ion shields every turn. And there's going to be times where run them through with your Warglaives, or your sweep attack on one of the big knights is going to be extremely powerful. Vow of Retribution is nice in shooting, and then full tilt. Like, yeah, it's just a full complement of stuff to do in every situation, which I like. Something in melee, something in shooting, something on your opponent's turn, defensive and offensive, and movement. Like, what more could you ask for? Overall, I'm not sure if this is going to be my favorite detachment yet. Right now, I'm kind of leaning between this and the Armiger one, and we'll talk about here in a minute. But overall, I think this is a fantastic detachment that you really can't go wrong with. And again, I am a big proponent right now that movement and actions are what wins games. Action economy and movement are what wins games. And again, that full tilt later in the game, when you have limited units, your opponent thinks they're safe, they have a couple of units that they're hoping to live to be able to score, and then all of a sudden you're moving extra 4, 6, 10 inches to get to other places, steal objectives, is absolutely backbreaking. One of the things I also really like about this detachment is there is absolutely no restrictions to your list building. You can bring any kind of list that you want and it will work in this detachment. And I like that a lot. I like the flexibility to be able to adjust to the meta that you're seeing, or what models you have, or what you felt like playing, and still have the depth of knowledge and experience that you have playing this detachment. I think it's great. And this is definitely one of my forerunners for potentially best detachment. Next up is Questoris Companions, which is the detachment that focuses on bringing more bigs than the Armingers. Here, you're able to select multiple oaths, picking a new one each time you complete one. And the bonus is that you continue to gain those qualities as well. So at the beginning of the game, you'll select one oath and one quality. And once that oath is accomplished, you will generate your 2 CP, and you will immediately pick another oath and quality that you have not chosen yet. If that one is completed, then you will gain 1 CP and can move on to the third. Overall, continuously buffing your knights. So you can start off with your rerolls, and as soon as you, for example, control more objectives than your opponent, you can then select to add movement to your knights, and they will have that for the remainder of the game as well. Can be very powerful based on sequencing. And of course, if you're the kind of person that you like to play knights and big stompy robots, then this would be the detachment for you. Overall, I am a little skeptical of it, if I'm being completely transparent, just because, as I previously mentioned, I feel like you are trading power for activation, or activations for power, and that could be a problem. For example, if you're running 5 large knights, your opponent takes out one of them, you've lost essentially a fifth of your army already. But we'll see how it turns out. Much like the previous detachment, all the enhancements in this one have an ongoing theme, and that's the fact that they are one-time uses and then considered expended, but when you complete your oath, you then refresh them. That being said, the first one is Herald of Triumph, where at the end of the charge move, the knight wearing this can trigger it, expending it and forcing every enemy unit within engagement range to take a battle shock test at a -1. I'm pretty low on these kind of effects. I think they're too swingy. Yes, it could change over a point or potentially stop an opponent from getting -1 to damage or +1 to wound. So it does come in handy, but the fact that it is extremely inconsistent, even at a -1, most of the time, it's still going to be a 50-50 shot. I'm not the biggest fan of this, and there are ways that people can essentially buff their leadership. So I'm not high on this one at all. Wormslayer Divination is next. In the shooting phase, the bearer can trigger this, and if they are specifically shooting at a unit with flying, they are able to reroll the hit roll. You'll take this if you have extra points, but I'm not banking on it because fly is kind of hit or miss. Pennant of the Silvered Fury. Imperial Knight model in the fight phase can expend this enhancement, and its melee weapons gain sustain hits too. This one is solid, definitely allowing both the strike and the sweep attacks to pop off. More importantly, the sweep attacks, if they have any additional keywords like lethals or dev wounds, and you're absolutely going ham on this. I think it's a great enhancement. This is probably the one I'm going to try to sneak in as much as possible on something like a Gallant, but even any of the mechs with a chain blade can do some work. Last is Crushing Condemnation, which essentially is the bearer, once it completes its attacks in melee, can pick a unit within 12 inches and visible to it, but not in engagement range, and chuck a grenade at it. Roll 6 dice, and for every 4+, they suffer a mortal wound. It's a shame you can't use it to finish off the unit you were in combat with, but it does allow you to kind of reach out and hit some nearby units. Maybe they have a lone op or something they were screening, so you can pick that off. It's free extra wounds, so why not? Helps maybe scoop up a wounded vehicle or trash unit. So I think there's some uses for it. Is it going to be absolutely stellar? I mean, maybe if you roll 5 mortals, but overall, it's okay. Moving into the stratagems, and all these can only target Titanic Imperial Knights, so keep that in mind as armigers are not going to receive these buffs. First up is Courageous Stand. In our opponent's shooting or fight phase, for 1 command point, we can give a knight a 6+ feel no pain until the end of the phase. Is it stellar? No, but it's the only defensive stratagem we have in this detachment. So if you really want your knight to survive and you know they're going to sink a significant amount of shots into it, then you're going to pop this. That being said, if it's a low volume of shot with potential high damage, then I would suggest probably better off spending the CP on a reroll. Titanic Duel is next, and it is pretty spicy. It's a little different than the one we see in the Chaos Knights Codex. In our shooting or fight phase, for 1 command point, we can target an Imperial Knight model, and anytime it sends attacks towards a monster, Titanic, or Walker unit, we can add 1 to the wound and add 1 to the hit roll. This is great. It's really nice to be able to get our high power, high strength weapons to wound on 2s and hit on 2s instead of 3s, just kind of solidifying that. That being said, it does exclude vehicles, so we're not going to be hitting tanks with this, unfortunately. A little bit of a bummer, but I think they had to give us some kind of disclaimer there, so it's not just +1 to hit and wound the entire time. Overall, I think this one's great. You're going to use it just about any time you can to guarantee we can take those harder targets down, since those are typically the things that are better into us. Moment of Glory will trigger in the fight phase just before our knight will consolidate. And for one command point, you can add an additional 3 inches to that consolidate. So it's going to be 6 inches for the majority of the knights and 9 inches on the gallant. Very situational one. You're not always going to use this in every game, but when you do, it's going to be pretty awesome, because you are going to use it to move on to an objective that your opponent had no intentions of you even being remotely close to getting onto. You're able to tag other things and keep them in combat, especially if your opponent was planning on moving with them, or if they're not good into something like the Gallant or into Canis. And now you're giving yourself a little bit of protection with the -1 to hit, or forcing a unit to fall back and out of combat, taking it out for the turn. I think this is really good. Again, it's very situational, but with how big our bases are, I think you'll find more uses for this than your typical world leaders or orc army. But when they use it, it's powerful. So I feel like it's going to be the same thing for us. Hero's Tread is up next, and this is one of these strats that I feel really would make this detachment work. At the end of your command phase for a CP, your level of control on that objective is now 5 unless otherwise higher, and will remain in your control until the opponent can steal it away, i.e. it's sticky objective on any large knight. The fact that it has 5 OC is extremely solid because of the fact that trash can no longer just simply move on there and steal it. They have to actually commit a legit unit to take it over from you, which is really nice, especially in the late game when supplies and resources are limited. It allows you to kind of maximize your ability to push up the board even with limited models. A couple of downsides to it is it does only trigger in your command phase, so you cannot do like what the Chaos Knights do and essentially do it after you fight or consolidate onto the objective. The other thing also, speaking of which, is that it does not have the small clause that states under your control until your opponent takes it over. So yes, they need 6 to take over the point, but if they do put 5 OC on it, they will be able to contest it, so you will not score it on your turn. So keep that in mind moving forward, but overall, this is definitely the glue that brings the detachment together. Unstoppable Warrior for 2 CP in your movement phase. A knight that has just fallen back, it is now eligible to declare a charge and shoot in a turn in which it has fallen back. This one is absolutely amazing. One of the ways that knights can get kind of counterplayed is to tie them up in combat, which is typically our weaker end, especially the gun platforms that don't have good melee. This completely negates that. If your opponent gets the jump on you, you fail a charge, or they charge you through a wall and tag you but do not take you out, you're in that awkward position. Do I stay in combat to be able to shoot but risk them fighting first unless I charge in with another knight, or do I fall back and lose all those resources? And this strat just fixes that completely. You can reset combat, you can fall back and shoot, and if it's a hybrid, you can fall back, shoot, and still charge. If it's a gun platform, you can fall back and shoot without the penalty, as well as not risking getting picked up on your own turn. Also remember that Titanic models can move over other units, so you can essentially use this to fall back over whatever they were move blocking and then charge into that they were protecting. Oh, so good. Driven by the Past is our last one. For 1 CP in your charge phase, 1 Imperial Knight Titanic unit from your army is eligible to declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced. Down and dirty, tried and true, solid stratagem. It's going to be nice when you need it to give that extra movement to something like a Lancer or a Gallant. The fact that it does not give the weapons, the ranged weapons assault, means you're not going to be using this on your hybrid knights too often, but I could definitely see it being useful when you need it to. So yeah, I like it. This one's solid. I think they did a solid job on this detachment. For those of you that like running as many bigs as possible, this will be the one for you. You can run 5 if you adjust the points a little bit. We'll have to wait and see what the enhancements actually come out costing. But I probably see this sitting closer to a 4-3, maybe even a 3-4 build, just dependent on what the meta is looking like and your allies and whatnot. But I think you will not be suffering too much if you run 4 bigs with this detachment, because they give you the tools you need to make up the difference. So this one's great. Not a high pick for me personally, but I definitely won't fault anyone for running it. Third on our list is Spearhead at Arms. This is the Armiger-centric detachment, as it gives our Armigers battle line keywords, so now we can bring more than 3 again. And the detachment rule is essentially, if you have a bondsman ability target an Armiger, you can target up to 3 Armigers with that single bondsman ability. A couple of caveats: if you're honored, it goes from 12 inches to 15 inches, and you can only still give a single Armiger 1 bondsman ability, so you are unable to stack them. Also, the way it's written, we're led to believe that you cannot stack the same bondsman ability, or not stack, but rebuff. So for example, you can't bring 2 defenders and give 6 Armigers -1 incoming damage, or bring 2 Crusaders and give 6 Armigers +1 to hit. It would be a Crusader buffs 3 different Armigers, and a Gallant will buff the other 3. Overall, a pretty darn strong detachment rule, as some bondsman abilities are already pretty good on their own, and being able to do it to 3 different Armigers is extremely powerful. I definitely gave the Warden's -1 incoming damage ability on 2 Armigers with the enhancement on it a try, and though it was quite expensive, it did feel pretty darn good. And this is similar to that. Buffing 3 Helverins to get ignore, cover, and sustain hits. This is sweet. It is interesting, as it does still incentivize us to bring big knights and not strictly go Armiger spam like we see on the War Dog detachment. But overall, yeah, this one's a spicy meatball, and one of my 2 top runners for best detachment in the Codex. So first up is Mentor's Pride, that will give those Armigers the ability to reroll hits of 1. Solid. We had that initially when the index first dropped, and it seemed pretty good. And I think buffing 3 different Armigers to reroll 1s is solid. This is great. You'll definitely take it if you have the points. Fables of Nightmare will give the buffed Armigers precision and just their melee weapons. Yeah, how often have you gotten 2 Warglaives into the same target? It happens occasionally, because I remember using Squire's Duty on them, but not very often. Plus, we don't really have enough attacks to really capitalize on the precision. So yeah, we're probably going to leave this one at home. Tales of Heroism reads, each time one of those Armiger models makes a melee attack, you can ignore any or all modifiers to the hit and or wound roll. This one is sweet. You do have to make sure you have a knight inside 12 inches to buff 2 different Armigers, at least, that are in combat. So that's a bit of an ask, but being able to ignore modifiers is fantastic, especially when an Armiger is bracketed, or if the opponent has -1 to hit or -1 to wound. This negates that completely. Yeah, this is spicy. They definitely didn't want to go around stealth and things like that, so they didn't give it to us in shooting, but having it in melee can be very potent. Again, I think the setup cost is probably a little high, so if you don't take this, I don't think you're missing out much. You kind of have to make sure that whatever you're sending with, it's going to go on Warglaives, right? Putting it on Armiger or Helverins isn't going to do that much, because it does not affect shooting. It specifically says when they make a melee attack, but buffing some Warglaives, especially like I said, when they've taken a couple of hits, is kind of nice. So you're probably going to want it on one of your hybrid knights, or maybe something again like a Lancer that's going to be upfront with them. The last one, Martial Tuition, is quite interesting because it essentially allows you, once per turn, you can target one of those Armiger models with the counter-offensive stratagem for 0 CP. And it does name the stratagem directly. So it is a 2 CP discount, and you could do it every turn. So you can interrupt on your turn and then interrupt on your opponent's turn, which, I mean, I kind of feel like that's one heck of a go turn for the two of you if you're just swinging haymakers. But that is quite powerful. The fact that this thing could potentially give you back 4 CP is kind of huge. And I'm not sure if I clarified that earlier because I'm kind of rushing through these a bit, but they all do have while 2 or more armigers are affected. So it's kind of a pseudo squire's duty thing where you can't just target it if only a single armiger has this bondsman ability. So there is a little bit of an issue there, right? If the timing's kind of off, you lose 2 of them, something like that, or the knight dies, obviously you can't use it, etc. So it's interesting. I think, man, 2 or more armiger models are under the effects of the various bondsman ability. Yeah, so they don't both have to be in combat. So that is they just have to have the bondsman ability. So that's not too bad. It's interesting. I feel like it's a really good enhancement. I guess we're going to have to see how much it costs via point. If it's too expensive, I'm not 100% sure if I'll take it. I think it depends also on your build. If you're more of a melee heavy and you expect to be in combat quite a bit, or maybe your local meta has a lot of world leaders and Templars and orcs and stuff like that, and people that are going to be charging you, then maybe this one's a little more potent as well. I'm not sure. I think it's good. I personally think it's good because, like I said, even just getting a 2 CP discount is awesome. Moreover, the fact that it does name it directly means that you could potentially, and again, this sounds like a really bad day for you, but you can interrupt for 2 CP, then your opponent gets to fight. And if they fight incorrectly again, which I guess already is starting to sound a little sketchy, you can interrupt with this ability for free. And that really puts you in a good spot. But again, I don't know. I'm really on the fence on this one. Overall, I think the enhancements go well with the detachment. It is a little clunky, I will say that. I personally am not the biggest fan of when they make you jump through too many hoops to accomplish things, because here you already have to have the knight within range to buff an armiger, and you're giving the enhancement to a big knight, but it's not going to get it itself. And then you also have to maintain at least 2 bondsman abilities to trigger it, to be able to even trigger this. And then on top of that, whatever scenario it's requesting of you, it's not one of those natural +1 damage or -1 incoming damage or -1 to hit kind of. These are timed. So I'm a little weak on them, but as I said in the beginning, I'm already kind of low on enhancements to begin with. If I could take another body, I'd rather do that. So yeah, these are kind of middle of the road for me. Moving into the stratagems, I think there's some good ones here, but I will warn you, the targeting of them can be a little finicky and clunky. So I think after you get some reps in with the detachment, you'll be a lot smoother at it, but I can guarantee you your opponent's going to question exactly how this works several times. So let's dive on in. The first one is Virtue of Courage. For 1 CP at the start of the fight phase, you can either target a single armiger or an Imperial Knight's Titanic model from your army and 1 or more friendly armiger models affected by that model's bondsman ability. So again, something similar to what we saw in the enhancements. And this one is select 1 enemy unit until the end of the phase. Each time one of your armiger models makes an attack that targets that enemy unit, add 1 to the hit roll. It does specifically state that only the armigers will get this buff. So even though you are targeting a Questoris, they are not going to get that buff. And it does target the specific enemy unit as well. Select 1 enemy unit. And so the thing is that you aren't able to buff 3 armigers. All 3 of them get +1 to hit against 3 different targets. It kind of is forcing you to consolidate into 1. But again, it gives you that flexibility also where you could just strictly target 1 armiger, so you don't have to worry about that clause of the Questoris being nearby and whatnot. So overall, I think it's fine. Again, it is in melee, so you're really only doing this on your warglaves and probably only on your sweep. I don't know if you get enough attacks. Nah, I'd probably do it on the strike as well if it was something that I really need to get through there and I was wounding on 3s. But yeah, I think it's middle of the road. It's fine. Exemplar's Wisdom is in the shooting phase after an Imperial Knight Titanic model from your army has shot, and you target that Titanic model, and then all armigers that have its bondsman ability will then receive +1 AP against that target for a single CP. Yeah, so 1 AP is great. Again, we use Squire's Duty pretty much every turn back in the index. The issue I have with this is that you have to fire your, man, this one feels a little too clunky for me, but at the same time, I guess you can split fire. Because initially I was thinking, I was like, okay, what? Are you giving it to a melee knight and then just using its rockets or its autocannon to, or not its autocannon, it's stubber to ping something, and then now all your armigers get buffed, but then they probably don't have the bondsman ability from the melee knight, potentially. But I guess if you're using something like a Crusader, then again, the Crusader can just fire its stubber or something small into the target, ping off a hit or two, then you can use this. So it's not as clunky as I anticipated, because really I normally send my big knight into something, and then if it doesn't finish it off, then I'll send my armigers, or send the big knight into something entirely different and all the armigers into something else. So I could see a little bit of conflict with this one, but the more I thought about it, you can just, again, kind of split fire, plink off a hit or two like we do with the Immolator to strip cover, and then you get that +1 AP. It is only in shooting, so we're not going to be able to use it on our sweep or anything like that, but I'm a little low on this, to be completely honest, but it's a good way to counteract something like Armor of Contempt, or if you really can't strip cover from them, this is a nice little bonus there as well. Mantle of the Mentor is a sweet one for 1 CP at the start of our shooting phase, and it has that clause, either one armiger or a Titanic Knight that is buffing various armigers, and they are able to shoot in a turn in which they fell back. This is awesome. I like this one quite a bit because, again, we've spoken about it a couple times already. Tying up knights in combat is the way that you mitigate some of our lethality, and being that warglaive that can back out and shoot its melta without penalty, or more importantly, our Helverins getting out of combat, so now we can fire at multiple targets, is huge. That's also a good way for the opponent to protect themselves, tagging a couple of armigers or knights, and now they're unable to fire. We just saw that in one of the more recent battle reports where Deathstrong came in and they essentially negated my Immolator and my Gallant because I wasn't able to shoot at them unless I fell back with those two. And now in this scenario, granted, it targets the big knight, but the big knight cannot fall back, but still allowing 2 armigers, right? Maybe you run a screen with your warglaives or with your Helverins to make sure they can't get to your Crusader, and now those Helverins can fall back and they're not taking out of the fight. They can still engage both the unit that they fell back from or some other unit. We also do get to fall back 12 inches, which means if they leave us an opening, we can work around them to touch an objective or get around the corner and then still engage something that was hiding or they were hoping to screen us out from. Yeah, I like this one quite a bit. I think it's strong. Thin their ranks triggers in the shooting phase, and for 1 CP, you can buff either a single armiger or the ones that are affected by a Titanic Knight's bondsman ability. And until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by your armiger models have rapid fire 1 ability. So this is interesting. I think this is somewhat equivalent to a reroll. I'm not huge into the math hammer part, to be completely honest with you. I try my best to take the math or the dice out of it, and so I feel like if I dive too deep into math hammer, then I kind of get skewed when it skews a little bit off of the average or what should happen, but that's why we play dice games, I guess. Anyways, I'm not sure. This is very interesting. I think giving potentially 2, I don't really know if this is going to give warglaives 2 extra shots, because you have to be within 6 inches off the top mountain melta, though it does help if you're kind of the person that builds all your armigers to have the stubber to take out trash. So that's kind of nice there, but it already actually, it wouldn't work on the stubber. Never mind. It doesn't stack. You just get rapid fire. So yeah, really So it gives you, it's easier to get the rapid fire, the 2 extra shots on the Helverins because then they got to be within 24. I mean, so it buffs, if it buffs 3 Helverins, then you're getting 6 extra shots, which isn't nothing. I definitely think that's something. On the Warglaves, again, being realistic, you're probably not going to get the rapid fire on the top mounting Melta. So best case, you're getting 3 extra Melta shots, which again isn't nothing. But let's be honest, we barely with our reroll get both of the Melta shots to hit. So I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be using this one this often, to be completely transparent with you. I'm probably not going to be doing it with my Meltas. I probably will be doing it more often when I need the extra shots on the autocannons, if I'm chewing through a bunch of Terminators or infantry and I just need the extra shots. I think there's a consideration there to do it because it's also easier to trigger. Because in reality, if you're that close to trigger the rapid fire off of our Meltas, you're most likely in range for an easy charge to also tank shock or melee them down. So yeah, I think this one's a little bit on the lower side, and that's fine. There's gonna be times where you use it, but they can't all be bangers. So yeah, I'm pretty low on this one. Let duty be your shield. That's a pretty cool name, not gonna lie. I don't use that. Most of the time I just tell people the ability when I tell them my stratagems, but that one's pretty cool. For 1 CP in our opponent's shooting phase after they've selected an armiger as the target, that 1 armiger and that 1 armiger alone. So this does not have that clause that we've seen in the previous ones where it buffs multiples. This will only buff a single armiger, and it's essentially Armor of Contempt. Until the end of the phase, all incoming attacks have -1 AP. So yeah, it's solid. It's a good one, especially when you can combo it off with cover. So you're essentially getting -2 to the AP. That's really good for keeping one of your armigers alive, especially if they're doing something like sabotage or they're the only ones guarding an objective. I think it's great. This is going to be useful. And the good thing is that it's super easy to set up. Your opponent just has to shoot at you and bam, you get AOC. So solid. I think you're going to use this one quite a bit, honestly. It's a shame that it is only in the shooting phase. It would have been nice if they gave it to us in combat, especially since it's only on armigers. But, you know, what are you going to do? Finally, we have Squires of the Hunt. For 1 CP at the end of your opponent's fight phase, 1 armiger, or, of course, more that are affected by a knight's bondsman ability, are no more than 9 inches away from within. Correction. They are within the 9 inches of the battlefield edge and not in engagement range, can be removed from the battlefield and placed into strategic reserves. So yeah, this one seems pretty spicy to me. The one caveat I will say before I forget is that they are going to miss the bondsman abilities because the bondsman abilities happen in the command phase. And these are going to arrive in your movement phase. So they will come in the next turn. And that means they are going to miss on their bondsman abilities as well as being targetable by stratagems minus the, allied. Because obviously most of these allow you to target them just a single armiger. So they'll still be the target. They're not completely pseudo battle shocked. But the fact that you can target up to 3, that seems really powerful. You can also, it doesn't say anything about bringing back in the next turn. So you could keep them in reserves and wait to rapid 1 of them in, like bring down 2 and then leave 1 in strategic reserves to rapid in on your opponent's turn to react to what they're doing. It's a good way as well to displace if you overcommit to one side of the board and your opponent decides they're going to run from you, then you can pick up a bunch of armigers and put them on the other side. Of course, if it's later in the game, now you can start threatening their backfield. I think this one's extremely powerful. And the interesting thing too is that because of the way it's worded and how it's played, you can somewhat deceive your opponent as well. If you kind of play a little towards the board edges or lean to one side and something like that, it's difficult for your opponent to ID exactly what you are or are not going to be picking up. And so that's kind of interesting. I was going to say you can use it as bait. If they start chasing one down, if you have one in your expansion or you threaten them and then you run away because it's wounded and they're like, well, I'm going to get off the board, you can bamf it off the board ahead of them. But I'm not sure if that's the best use of it. And of course, if you're going to do more than one, that would be great. Do the Grey Knight thing and completely displace a good chunk of your army and they don't know what's going on. But at the same time, that means that you have 3 of them near a table edge and also within buffing distance of the... Oh, I guess not. I guess if you know you're going to pick them up at the end of the turn, then you're fine. Because you'll buff the armigers in the command phase and they can move, do whatever they need to do, and they're still technically buffed into your subsequent command phase. So yeah, this one's spicy. I think there might be a chance it gets used a little more often than it should, but then there's also going to be other times where you use it and it's going to be an absolute blowout, especially something like Scorched Earth or Supply Drop, where maybe your natural expansion is the one that leaves on turn 4, and so your opponent's like, sweet, I'm going to score this one on turn 5, keep mine on, or score it, you know what I mean, the one that's worth 8 points. And you just displace 3 of your armigers and they show up out of nowhere and just blast them. So that's extremely spicy as well. I like this one quite a bit. Again, you're not going to use it every game, or maybe you do. Right? If you have an armiger towards the backfield that literally are just there to screen out the backfield, come turn 3, they've kind of stuck there. You can pick them up and now deploy them in your opponent's deployment zone or even more aggressive. So yeah, this one's a good one. I like this one, and it's probably my favorite. No, I think being able to fall back and shoot is probably my favorite one in this detachment. And then Squire's Hunt is the next one. The other ones are good. I like them. They're just not, to me, as absolutely backbreaking or stellar. The Virtue Courage, the +1 to hit, is really good. Again, I'm thinking best case scenario, if you're buffing 3 Warglaves or 3 Helvarens, then you're rocking and rolling. So these are good. These are solid. I like them. I actually like the fact that none of them are broken, but all of them are useful. So again, I really think this is a solid detachment. I think it's going to do some work. I will admit that I am not the biggest fan of the clunkiness of some of these stratagems and the enhancements, but at least the stratagems do have the insurance policy of just being able to target a single armiger. Are you really getting your money's worth out of them there? The movement ones, yes. The other ones, no, but it's there. So you're not completely whiffed. But again, I will definitely identify the clunkiness, and I'll have to get my reps in with it to kind of make the final call on it. And the final detachment for the Codex is Gate Warden Lance. At the start of the first battle round, select 2 objective markers on the battlefield to be your foundations. When you draw a line from any part of one of your foundations to the other, so essentially a 40 millimeter line across the board, if any part of a model's base, or a hull if it doesn't have a base, crosses the line, that model's unit is said to be on your defensive line. While an Imperial Knights unit from your army is on your defensive line, that unit has the following ability. Each time a model in that unit makes an attack that targets a visible enemy unit, you can ignore any or all modifiers to hit, and weapons equipped by models in that unit have a sustained hit ability. Each time one of your foundations is removed from the battlefield, just after it is removed, select a new objective marker on the battlefield to be one of your foundations. So this one is really interesting. First off, I absolutely love the buff it gives you. Absolutely fantastic. Ignoring any modifiers to hit means -1 to hit, such as stealth or being bracketed, just straight up goes out the window. And then sustained hits, it doesn't say ranged or melee weapons. So both, literally, if you're fighting on the line, you get sustained hits 1. If you're shooting on the line, you get sustained hits 1. That is absolutely fantastic. So this is a great buff. They covered objectives that get removed later in the game, such as Supply Drop or Scorched Earth. You immediately just draw a new line, so that's nice. And then, of course, a lot of talk has been about drawing one from your deployment zone or your home objective to the enemy's home objective, or on hidden supplies. When there's an extra one, there's 4 objectives in no man's land, you can just run one right across all 4. So that's great too. I think this is a super neat detachment rule and interesting, and definitely incentivizes some other spectrum of gameplay. That being said, I personally have issues with rules that requires you to be or do a certain thing. And the reason why I say that is because combat is malleable or it's fluid, right? And you're not always going to be able to accommodate that specific kind of situation when you need it to. Moreover, your opponent is going to do everything they can to avoid that situation as well. Now, that being said, there are kind of ways that there's only so much you can do, right? We know that purifiers and rubrics get to reroll wounds, full rerolls to wound if you are on objective. Well, you're not going to stand on objective. That being said, I guess there are going to be times where you can avoid standing on objective if you know that there's a crackback or that's a target of opportunity. And so this one is a little easier, I think, to play around just because of the fact that the line is, it's hard to say. Like, we have big models and large bases, so I think it's going to be a little easier for us to stand on that line than incentivized or than initially. But at the same time, what happens if you need to charge something like a Gallant or a Lancer or even Canis, and the charge takes you off the line? Are you not going to do that charge? No, you're going to do the charge. And so certain things like that, I think, is going to make a gameplay for this one interesting, to say the least. I don't think it's bad. Again, the buff is absolutely fantastic. We'll see how the enhancements and the stratagems go here in a minute, but I do think that there are going to be times, or what happens if you go ahead in supplies and you select down the middle, but then for whatever reason you see an opening and you push one of your guys into the enemy deployment zone. I mean, I guess it's kind of one of those things where you're either playing with a buff or you're just playing normal Warhammer. So I guess that probably means that the low isn't that low, because at the end of the day, we're doing it already. It also leans into the Knights gameplay of bullying primary. You can draw the line down the center, hitting all three objectives, and then just solidify your control of your natural expansion and the center, and just tell your opponent, all right, come and take it. And that could work out in most cases if you have the durability. Of course, it's not giving us a defensive buff, so hopefully the stratagems will make up for it, but we'll see. First enhancement is Acquisitor at Arms. While the bearer is on your defensive line and there are no enemy units on your defensive line, add the bearer's objective control characteristic to that of each model affected by the bearer's bondsman ability. I mean, having an OC, 6 plus 8. So OC 14 Armiger means that it can easily steal an objective from the opponent, but they have to not be on your objective line, or you're on your line, on your defensive line, which it's, so how does this work? I guess if they can reactive move onto your line, because you can obviously blast them off I want to say this one's not great, but in the means of potentially stealing an objective or outseeing an opponent, it works out because they're not going to, you blast whatever's on your line, you blast the line, you blast them. Now, if it's a larger unit, they may pull models so they keep one on the line. I mean, there's that argument, but obviously now we're just talking about dice rolls. So if they have something on the line, you blast it off of it, and then the expansion you couldn't get to, you can only get maybe one Armiger. You bondsman that Armiger, and then you're going to give it the +8 OC, and then it moves on to their objective. And with 14 OC, I find it very difficult to believe it's not going to steal from them, and they won't be able to get back on your line until after their command phase where they already didn't score the primary. So, I mean, it's got some spice to it. Purgation's Hand. Each time the bearer makes a melee attack, if the bearer is on your defensive line, reroll a hit roll of 1 and reroll a wound roll of 1. So the buff is solid. Again, I mean, I'm going to beat a dead horse, so I'm not going to say it. It's a melee attack, and you have to be on your defensive line. So realistically, again, we could talk about this all day because the Knight's base is so large. There is a chance that you can pivot lengthwise and make sure the back end of your base is still touching the offensive line while you charge an opponent. If you're sticking to the method that people were talking about as far as going from your home objective to the enemy's home objective, then to stand on the line, you're really only going to be near the center objective. And so the buff is great, though I don't know how often you'll be able to trigger it. Again, I could be wrong. This one's going to be very hard to evaluate just because of the fact that which way are you going to draw your line, which way, what is the mission, and then how is the gameplay playing out. So if your opponent just ignores the center objective or keeps their guys outside of range where you can move up to 39 millimeters away from the line and still engage them, I'm not a fan of. I don't know. I'm a little lost for words on this one. I'm glad I saved it for last. Next up is Augury Halo. Each time the bear makes a ranged attack while the bear is on your defensive line, weapons equipped by the bear have ignores cover. Yeah, this one's solid. Put it on your shooting platform, slap it on your natural expansion, or just make sure it's in a building on the line, and yeah, just go ham. This one's great. I think this is probably one of the ones that you will auto take if you have the points left over. Last is Vengeful Tread, which once per turn, you can target the bear with the Tank Shock stratagem for 0 CP. It names a stratagem, so you can do it even if you did it with something else previously, and it's straight up 0, and it does not have the clause of having to be on the defensive line. So this one's solid. I like it. Nice and simple, clean. Is it an auto include? I think you could do without it if you don't have the points, but if you do, you're happy to take this one. Moving into the stratagems, the first one is Drive Them Out, and for 1 CP in either your shooting or fight phase, you can allow a knight to crit on 5s if the enemy unit is on your defensive line. This is pretty powerful. We saw this in Canis, on Canis Rex in the Index, and they removed it because it is a huge damage multiplier, especially if you're talking about on the sweep of something like a Gallant or even on a Chainblade where you have 12 attacks that are exploding. That is huge. And shooting something like a Crusader or even on a Helverin, I think it could do some work. You could pop off potentially, but on a Crusader, oh my goodness, that thing's got so many weapons, it's going ham. So yeah, this one's good. Obviously, they do have to be on your defensive line, so your opponent can play around it somewhat, but not always. Sometimes you're just going to have to. And this one, if you get the chance to do it, it's definitely going to throw down. I think it's a good one. Next up is a Lance Breaker. For 1 CP in the fight phase, you can essentially give one of your knights that's on your defensive line -1 to wound if the strength characteristic is higher than your toughness. Yeah, this one's solid. You're going to use it whenever you can because it will definitely help keeping your knights alive, especially on the line. That probably means they're on objectives and scoring points, so you're going to want it. This one's solid. Steadfast Superiority. For 1 CP in your fight phase, targeting a knight that is on your defensive line and in engagement range, it will be able to reroll hits until the end of the phase. This one's another solid one. Who doesn't like rerolls and being able to reroll all your hits? It ups your damage output and guarantees or ensures a higher level of success. So I like this one. This one's good. Marshal the Defense. For 1 CP in your movement phase, you can buff up to 2 different knights and add an additional 3 inches to their movement. This is great. I love this one. No caveats, nothing to jump through hoops. It's just straight up, here's more speed. Yeah, this one's good. It's going to help your charges get smaller. It's going to help you get line of sight around corners. It's going to allow you to make those large plays or large movements to score things like established locus or get on those objectives. This is just the utility on this one, and the fact that you can buff 2 different knights at the same time is awesome. Titanic Bombardment. For 1 CP in your shooting phase, a Titanic Knight, so no armatures in this one, that remained stationary this turn and that is on your defensive line can then gain sustain hits 2 for the phase. Oh man, sustain hit 2 is extremely powerful. The caveat of it having to be on your line and not moved this turn is slightly difficult. It depends where you drew your line. Did you draw your line from a home objective to home objective, and then it could simply just tow into, on the first turn, it tows into the building that cuts down the center, so it has the largest line of sight? That's probably most likely what you're going to be doing. It's already what we kind of do with our Crusaders, so that's most likely what you are going to be doing with this one. And it, because if you do it across across no man's land, then you're going to have to position it in advance turn 1 or 2 to get it onto the natural expansion. So it's really powerful. More importantly, especially on a gun platform, something that has dual guns, dual cannons is going to go ham on this versus something like Canis with the las impulsor. It can still pop off. Don't get me wrong. You can roll a 4 or 5 or a 6 on the dice and the number hits and go off. This on something like Anatrapos, oh man, that would be really nice as well. Castellan, oh, all right, yeah. Now I'm just kind of, this is really powerful. It's the stipulation is a little difficult to set up sometimes, but if you kind of already know your game plan and you adjust for it, I think you could definitely pop off with this thing. And more importantly, it does only target the knight, so you can split fire with this if you are doing something like a Castellan that has a ton of weapon systems. But this one's, you have to jump through some hoops, but the payoff is there. The final stratagem is Fortress of Intimidation. For 1 CP in your opponent's charge phase, you can select 1 Titanic Knight in your army that's on your defensive line. And each time the opponent attempts to charge that knight, that unit has to make a battle shock test at a -1. I'm not particularly a fan of these just because, as I mentioned earlier, they're very much 50-50. Even with the -1, I feel it's not as consistent as I would like it to be. If you have the CP to burn, you're going to use it because essentially what it's doing is, well, you're not always going to use it. I'm sorry. It depends on how bad they need a stratagem to be able to take down your knight. If it's a long bomb charge and they may need a reroll, then obviously the chance of them being battle shocked only gives them a single roll, which increases your chances of them not making the charge. Or if they have access to something like a stratagem to give them lethal hit or fights first, or what was the last one I was thinking of just now? +1 to wound. Right? If they have one of those stratagems in the tank that's really going to increase their lethality on your knight, then obviously you're going to give this one a shot and see where you go from there. So it's not horrible. It also says any unit. So the nice thing is if they do set up a double charge or they're setting up some kind of pile and consolidate to tag something else and things like that, then you also can, or get extra movement, right? Maybe they're trying to rush up a tank because they know their dudes are going to pick up the knight and the tank's going to get ahead further, or the vehicle. This can also kind of trigger that. And, worst case scenario, if they don't, then it still has a chance of battle shocking them to the point where they won't control the point if you have it stickied, or if they just won't control the point. So there are some advantages to this stratagem, and I see the application of it. Relying on battle shocks are so 50-50. If you've ever played against Tyranids, sometimes Shadows in the Warp can absolutely decimate your primary and you score nothing, and sometimes it can do absolutely nothing and you just practice rolling dice and everything in between, and that inconsistency is just not where I want to be. I think it's an interesting detachment, but I'm personally not a fan of it just because I don't appreciate it asking so much of me on a regular basis when, again, the battlefield can be extremely fluid. And it's not even like you can lean into, the detachment rule is awkward, but the stratagems are good, because the enhancement, the detachment rule, and the stratagems all really lean heavy into that on the line thing. And that's kind of enough to take me off of it. I'll probably still run it in a battle report to do my due diligence and show it off and try it out for people. But overall, this is not one that I'm particularly a fan of. That being said, if it's your jam, by all means, I think you can have some really thematic and fun gameplay with this one. And that is going to do it. That is the new Imperial Knights Codex. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you got something out of it, learned a thing or two, then by all means, hit that like and subscribe button, as I appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you in various battle reports moving forward. But that will do it for today. So until next time, as always, my fellow knights, happy gaming.